Hi, this is Tad the Diet Coach, and today I'm here with Jason Lawson for this edition of Raw Fitness Combine, and we're going to talk a little bit about what makes Jason special, which is, I guess as of last year, you're ranked number 2 in the world for the multiply bench. You hit a bench of like 825, I think it was, right?
Correct. That's correct.
And so that kind of makes you a resident expert on on bench press, as well as being genetically superior to me in the bench press. Tell me a little bit about what. Tell everybody that who may not know who you are. So the people who probably are involved in the sport probably know who you are, but some of us who aren't involved in the sport, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in bench pressing or in powerlifting, and what drew you to the sport.
I was always an athlete. I think it's funny that I bring this point up to people. I used to weigh about 155, 160. I weigh about 285 now. So my specialty used to actually I was a basketball player, and actually went in the military. I got in the Air Force and went away for about 4 years. And the first office I was in, everybody lifted weights and everything. And so, if you lifted weights and you went to the gym, you got 2 hours for lunch. So I was game. So it kind of started there, and I actually learned from a couple of powerlifters, and I actually had a good base to go on, and that actually was a huge plus for me because I didn't have to go through the trials and tribulations some people have to. I was kind of taught proper technique early on, but you still have to go through different things and find out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So eventually, over the years, I've had to do that also, but that was in about '96. So I guess I've been lifting for about 18 years or so. And then I got home from the military, and a friend of mine, we were lifting heavy, and we kind of got in our first competition in 2005. And we both took first place, and then actually got invited to Reno, Nevada for the Wabdol World Championships. That was pretty cool. Went on a team here from Tennessee, and I didn't do so well there, but I learned something. My other buddy, he did really well. The team overall did pretty good, but it was a good experience. But that was how I got kind of started, and I was hooked.
And that was how many years ago? You said 18 years.
2000.
Oh, 2005. Okay, so it wasn't all that long. I mean, well, it depends on how old you are. With because for me, it wasn't that long ago. It doesn't feel like it. What? So now you're doing the multiply. So you're doing you use the power suit and all that stuff in your bench. Okay. And
Yeah,
now
yeah, yeah.
I heard through the grapevine that I know that your last bench, max bench was 825 at contest, and I heard you were going to try to go for more. You're going to try to break the record or something this next year.
Yeah, actually, there's some elite lifters right now. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there benching a lot of weight, and it's still a big number. But yeah, I'm going to have to try to get 900 in July. That's what we're going for. It's very attainable. I think it just depends on if everything goes right, technique, strength, and everything. So, but that's what we're going for, 900 or plus.
So let's talk about technique in just a second, because I think you have some good. I think you have some good tips to help people become better benchers and to alleviate some mistakes that might be common for most people who go in the gym trying to do a good bench. But tell me a little bit about what's going to change this from now until say July. In your training or in your training philosophy, or maybe even in your preparation for this next meet, what are you doing differently that you didn't do before that's going to improve from 825? Because 825 is a huge number anyways.
Yeah. I think the huge thing is up to this meet, 17 weeks, I believe. So right now, I think you can appreciate this. You being a pro bodybuilder, we kind of have a bodybuilding stage in between meets where we don't necessarily take off powerlifting movements, but we do a lot more blood work, and don't put the stress on our joints and tendons as much, and give our body a rest.
Okay.
So we don't lock stuff. We kind of, try to be mindful of knees and elbows and wrists and stuff like that. But about 12 weeks out, 13, 12 weeks out, I'll really start loading it up. And we start about 75, 85% the first mini cycle, which is 4 weeks. And then we'll kind of ramp it up, as we get closer. And then we deload towards the end of the cycle, going into the meet so I can rest up and heal up and then go into meet. Hopefully,
Feeling strong.
everything.
I see. So, and you're gonna attempt 900. You said.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, good luck. I'll be rooting for you. So now I know you have some really. I know I know you know what you're doing when it comes to bench press, and I've not been a huge bencher in my lifetime. I think the most I ever got my weight up to, and it was just purely in the gym working out, not at a competition. I never competed in powerlifting, but was about 500, a little over 500. And for a guy my height, I'm only 5'7", and at the time I was about 240. That's and I was in my 20s. I'll tell you the reason why I stopped. I mean, I went 7 years without benching because while being a bodybuilder, I care about development more than I care about strength. You need to have strength to have a certain degree of development, but also I care more about preserving my body a bit because there's a lot. I do a lot of volume training, that kind of thing. But I stopped benching because I was feeling some of the shoulders issues. And while I never got injured, I knew that at the age of 26, 27, like I want to be in this sport for another 30, 40 years, and compete for another 20 years. And if I was going to do that, I was like, I'm not going to make it if I'm benching heavy every week. So I really kind of, through my own sort of evolution of chest training, I stopped doing a lot of flat benches, and I just stuck with pretty much incline bench if I was going to do bench, because I've always done that, and isolation movements. Now, from your perspective, I realized that powerlifting, there's a very specific application. Like, you have to go in the meet and bench. So you need to bench consistently. But how much does that play into your training? How much does trying to stay healthy? Because it sounds like you take that in consideration with how you move up to a contest. But how much can you really stay your body from getting those little injuries, those little things that people usually encounter when they bench heavy all the time? Can you keep away from injury this way, or is it just a matter of time?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the first one, I think you really have to look at, and I think you can appreciate this, is genetics.
Absolutely.
Some guys are just blessed with, good bone structure, good muscularity, and stuff like that. So that right there is a huge plus if you got that on your side. But I think the next thing is obviously knowledge and programming. You have to, you can't lift heavy all the time. And the old adage is, if you want to pick up something heavy, then you pick up heavy weight. And it is true still today. But I think some of the training principles and techniques and, some of the stuff coming out, bands and chains and stuff like that, where it's aggressive deload and, stuff like that allows you to lift heavier weights during the different stages of the lift, and in the bottom, in the hole, you don't have as much weight on you. And I guess why I bring that up is because it takes a little stress off your shoulders and
sure.
other things like that. But I think you have to stick to the main power movements in a training cycle. I think those always have to be there. But over time, I think if you listen to your body, you'll figure out, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and you just kind of work around those tweaks and slight injuries to make it to the end of the training cycle. But that's why programming and you writing down what works and what doesn't work is so important, because further on in your career, you'll figure out what one may not work for one of your teammates.
Yeah.
A lot of times in the gym, we get done with the main movement, squat, bench, or deadlift, and we'll go do different things because, this movement hurts someone's shoulder and this one doesn't, and so forth. So
you adapt the training. You're adapting your training to what's called for at the moment, so to speak.
Absolutely, or what you're going to benefit more from. And over the years, I think I've learned that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Anybody can get strong really fast. I mean, with good, diet, nutrition, supplementation, and training. But how long can you do that for? And how long
exactly.
of time can you, how long can you stay in a sport? Because hey, you were in it for 20-something years. So if somebody had to ask you to bow out after 10 or 12 years, that would have hurt.
Yeah.
They've been ready to go.
I'm still not ready to go yet.
Exactly. So I think if you take the mentality of that, it's a marathon and not a sprint. You're more mindful of what you do. You listen to your body more. And Tad, there's many weeks we're going through training and we'll all conversate and say, hey man, I'm beat up. Let's take a day off.
Sure.
Or let's do blood work. And what I mean by blood work, and what this is you just fill the blood, which blood is a healer. So, if you have nagging injuries and tweaks and stuff like that, the blood work, can work wonders from week to week. But So we'll just do blood work or take the entire day off, So, and that happens a lot because we know what works and what doesn't work for us.
This is kind of interesting that you bring up this point because it reminds me of some conversations I've had with some bodybuilders recently and some new technology, relatively new technology to the bodybuilding world. And I think it would be very, very applicable for the powerlifting world because it's so injury laden, or at least the potential for injury to soft tissue, tendons, ligaments, cartilage tissue is great. And I don't know if you've ever done any. I'd be interested to hear your opinion on cryogenic therapy. Have you heard of cryotherapy, where essentially it works like this? You get into a tank of sorts. It looks like a giant tank, and it goes up to your head, and then they reduce the temperature drastically, like negative 40 degrees. And you only, it's like, I mean, you have to get in there with no clothes, and you get inside, and they turn this machine on, and it pumps in, I think, some kind of liquid nitrogen or something to cool off the surrounding area or something, and it brings the temperature down to about negative. I think it's like negative 40, but you're only allowed to be in it for like 2 minutes, I think 2 or 3 minutes. But it's like everyone I've talked to says, oh, it's excruciating because your muscles start to twitch, they start to contract, and you feel it. It's like you basically are going through hypothermia. But then of course only for 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. I think it's 3 minutes. And they've done some studies with it, and they found that it's extremely healing on these soft tissue, on the ligaments and the tendons and the muscles. That it's extremely therapeutic and very, very healing. And everyone that I've talked to who's used it says, "Oh man, my joints are beat up because they've been in bodybuilding or powerlifting for a long time, and they're like, this stuff turns the clock back. It's like I feel so good. It regenerates tissue and all this stuff." And I'm like, wow, I'm like, I got to try this. Well, except for the cold part, I think I can handle it. But another really amazing thing is that it increases your metabolism as well. So like when you get in this thing and when you step out of it after you've been cold, if you've ever been out on a cold day and you come into your house under normal climate control conditions, you feel your heat. You feel your body has adjusted its thermostat to be able to burn more calories to heat your core up. Well, it's doing the same thing inside this machine, except to a much greater degree because you're basically in hypothermia, and you can burn an extra. And I've seen the studies on this. The average person can burn an extra 400 to 900 calories in 3 minutes. Like, wow. I mean, and my buddy, one of my friends, he's one of my pros who I work with, her husband, I think they have one of these in their gym, in their facility, and I was talking to him about it in detail, I think a couple weekends ago, and he's like, oh man, he loves it because he's had pec tear and he's had injuries from heavy benching and other stuff. But he's like, I love it, but I also hate it. He's like, because it's like, he goes, I'm sitting in this thing, and the lady who's operating the machine, who she's a technician, she's like, she's always asking him, how you doing? And he's like, oh man, this is fucking cold. He's like, I got it. He said, I'm just counting the seconds until she could open that door and get me out because it's that cold. But he says he feels great. So I'm wondering if you ever heard of it, or if this is something that would be interesting, or if you ever heard of other guys that in the industry who in powerlifting that have been using it, because I think it would be so beneficial. It is new though.
I've heard of it. I didn't actually know as much as you just discussed. I mean, so I learned some things from you. But it really works. But I've heard the same thing. It's something you can't imagine.
Yeah.
You never experienced it before, near death experience. I've heard something. Yeah,
I mean, I could barely stand to go. I mean, I have clients that are in like Chicago and something, and they tell me, and Minnesota, and this winter we've had a pretty tough winter here in the East Coast, and I'm like, well, how cold is it there? And because I'm like, it's like 7 degrees here. To me, being from California, I just moved to Pittsburgh this last year. I'm like, that's like Arctic weather to me. Well, they're like, oh, it's like negative 20 degrees. I'm like, holy fuck. I'm like, you kidding me, man? I'm like, I was like, that doesn't even sound cool. Not even the least, man. He's like, nah, man, it's cold. So just to willingly go into a machine that's going to reduce this temperature without any clothes on. Oh man. I'm like, he did tell me one thing, and I think it's hilarious. I have to mention it. He said, he goes, I do have to warn you, man, you get some incredible shrinkage when you come out of that machine.
I couldn't imagine that either.
So I was like, well, okay. But I was just curious because it sounds like something that'd be really beneficial. But speaking of, I know you mentioned your teammates. You're part of a team. So tell everybody a little bit about your team, because I don't know anything about the team that you're a part of.
Yeah, we got a team. The team name is Team Elite Alpha, and we train out of a buddy's gym. It's actually a personal training facility, Next Level in Hermitage, Tennessee. So, and we're just your average group of powerlifters. You know how it is. You make the sacrifice, you do all that stuff, but we're like brothers, man. I mean, we're all like family, and that's kind of the mindset we preach on the team, and we practice that. We have our tips, and we have our problems like everyone else, but we really, we spend more time around each other than we do our own families.
Right.
So we are family. So, we recently competing. They did really well in Knoxville.
Cool.
So the entire team actually is pretty strong, and we do pretty good in our respective weight classes. So
that's great. I mean, like, I know that in the fitness industry, especially like bodybuilding, it used to be when I got started in the 80s, in the late 80s or mid 80s and early 90s in my first years of competing. The first time I ever competed was 89. And I remember going through this, and I was in the Pacific Northwest at the time because I was going to college at OSU, Oregon State, not Ohio State, Oregon State. I'm a beaver. I'm not a nut. I'm a beaver. But it was I remember I knew everybody. Like, I knew all the bodybuilders in the Pacific Northwest. They knew me. I was one of the top guys out there. So it was like we all knew each other. We all shared information. Nowadays, it's a little different in some of these sports. And I find, and this is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I found that, like, at least in powerlifting, it's still kind of like that. Like, there's a brotherhood and there's some camaraderie that you just don't have anymore, because everybody, and I hate to say this because I love bodybuilding, I love the sport, but everyone is really shouting, me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And it's always about me, and so you miss out on some of that. I think that brotherhood, that camaraderie, that's so important when you're living a lifestyle that very few people live, and you need that kind of external support sometimes. So I'm so glad to hear that you say that, because it's like, and I've heard this echoed through other powerlifters and stuff that I've talked to, that they all kind of, most of the guys know each other, especially all the top guys, and they all kind of have this sort of friendship that I think in some ways is missing in the fitness industry.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a huge thing is even in bodybuilding. I mean, you can have the knowledge, you can have the supplements, you can have the training, you can have the gym, but you still have to perform on that day.
Yeah.
And in powerlifting, I mean, people share. There's not many secrets out there. Everybody's going to have a little something they may not want to let go. You just keep that edge. But still, I mean, it's kind of like even playing field. You're like, here, man, here's my workout. Go do it yourself, and I'll see you on Saturday. And you can outlift me. It's mono, and that's what's good about it, because, there's, with Facebook and I guess more Facebook than anything with social media, guys are discussing their training principles and techniques, and we're evaluating form and giving information and tips and tricks all the time on Facebook, because we know how it is. We know how it is to train out of a garage and not have the knowledge and not have the coaches and
Absolutely.
the teammates and the knowledge that some of us are blessed to have that have gotten from somebody else. And, it's been passed down to us, and it's our job today to pay it forward to the guys that are coming
Absolutely.
up, us. So I think that giving that stuff back to the powerlifters that are coming up is a huge aspect in our sport,
Yeah, and I think I take the same approach with my bodybuilding, because when growing up into the sport, there weren't coaches like me out there. Like, there just weren't any. Like, this is more of a recent phenomenon, the last 10 or 15 years, where you have a proliferation of a lot of coaches who are knowledgeable. Some really knowledgeable, others not quite so much. But for the most part, you have a selection of really good coaches out there in bodybuilding and in figure and bikini and all this stuff, that can be helpful to newcomers. And so newcomers now can really short circuit that learning curve that usually has to happen. Whereas, and I think it'll be interesting to see in the next 5 to 10 years, since now that social media is so integrated, is such an important integral part of the process of the fitness lifestyle, powerlifting, bodybuilding, you name it, and people are exchanging, information, and they're exchanging their tips, their workouts. It'll be interesting to see how that affects the movement of the sport and the progress. I think it will have I can already see that it's having a profound effect, that it will help educate a lot of the newcomers and get them ramped up much quicker, because if I knew what I know today, I would have taken at least 12 years off of the last 29 years that I've been in the sport. It would have taken easily 12 years off of it, and I would be physically in the place that I was today, that I am today, in my 20s. And we didn't have that, and fortunately for people today we didn't have that, because I had to learn it the hard way. I had to get good mentors, and I had to get good people to help me, and I had to learn on my own. I had to do a lot of education. I went to school for it and all this stuff. So, it's a good thing for them today, but not so good for me in my history. But good for me too, because it's provided me a career. But at the same time, it's like it is interesting, and I would it would be interesting to see what's going to happen in the future. But and speaking of tips, let's talk about. And I know being a good bencher, being a world-class bench presser. Let's talk about some common mistakes, and let's talk about things how you might suggest somebody go about, some tips about making somebody a better bencher.
Okay, I think that the huge misunderstanding about the powerlifting movements is anybody can lay down on a bench, grab a bar, take it out of the rack, bench press it. I don't think that's the hard part, and I think that even in your industry, in the bodybuilding industry, there's a lot of technique involved in you guys lifting too. Absolutely. Yeah. Just because we're powerlifters and we harp on technique more than anything.
Well, you need to. You need to.
You get hurt. You're squatting 900 pounds and you twist, you're blown out of disc, blew out an ACL. And I've got a couple of buddies that recently have done that. So it's nothing to play with. That's why we harp on it so much, because, and I'm kind of getting off the subject, but you get lackadaisical in training as a spotters, as liftoff man, because everybody's doing everything so, correct. Well, a technique flaw can get somebody injured, seriously injured, or worse. I don't want to say that, but it could.
Absolutely.
But we just harp on technique so much that it's second nature. It's like shooting free throws in basketball. You almost close your eyes and shoot a free throw. That's what you want. You want the muscle memory. Where to go, what it feels like, and where you're supposed to end. So I think the first thing that a lot of people don't realize is how important the setup is, proper setup. You can't lay down on a bench and grab the bar and just go to town, as far as it being a technical lift.
Right. So when you say setup, that means like your position on the bench, your foot placement, your where your hands are placed on the bar, and maybe also, because I know, like in golf, I've been a golfer since I was 9 years old, although I don't play a lot, but technique is so important, obviously. And one of the things that there's always stressed by all the pros that gave me lessons was you really want to do this the exact same way every single time. So that way, if you need to make a modification to change your technique, to improve your swing or to improve your ball placement, you're always doing it the same way, so you have a control, and then you make a small tweak, and then you can see what happens. Instead of what, like a lot of people, they just willy-nilly, it's like, well, I'm going to try to improve this, and they try to work on little aspects, but they're not really doing the whole thing the same way every time. And so I'm assuming that you really kind of want to do that in the bench press as well, because you want to ensure that if that you can isolate mistakes and you can make improvements and you can be predictable.
Absolutely. I think in any sport, and I hate to say it because I'm kind of biased with powerlifting, but in any sport, you practice like you're going to perform.
Absolutely.
You don't take off a lift. Because what happens is you start to create bad habits, and you get used to the bad habits, and then you have to go back and fix what you messed up, and then regain the good habits that you had in the beginning. So we train exactly like we're going to perform on Saturday and Sunday to powerlifting meet. Every set. There's voice commands, hollered out, every lift. If one guy needs to be, taught something, then we harp on that more. If another guy has a flaw in his technique on something else, we harp on that more. So it's very individualized in that sense. But we definitely harp on technique every set, every rep. So it does become muscle memory. You don't take off.
So now when you talk about proper setup, I hate to beat this point, but what is the proper foot placement and setup and leg drive? What is the proper setup on a bench press? Obviously, I don't know if it changes. It's probably going to change biomechanically a little bit, just little tiny things for each person. But what is the proper setup?
When you lay down on a bench, you definitely want to position your body to where if you can create an arch, you do want to get an arch. Because what that does, it takes your shoulder rotate, it takes your shoulder stress out of it completely, and you bring Everything comes from lift off, bring it out far enough to get it past your shoulders so your shoulders don't have to carry that weight out. And the foot placement leg drive is very important. And there's actually two styles of benching today, which they've always been this way. But you got your feet tucked under you, and I'm sure you've seen that.
Yep.
Most women bench like that for the simple fact that they can create such a huge arch, which in turn, creates almost like a decline bench.
Yeah, it's like
shortens their
tremendously. You get better leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're locked in. I mean, if you
Yeah.
create that arch with feet on, you lock in and actually have somebody maybe push your shoulders into the arch. I mean,
it's kind of funny you mentioned that, because I never studied the technique in that detail for powerlifting purposes. But when I was benching more heavier, like I was explaining to you earlier, I tucked my feet in. That was just natural for me to want to tuck my feet in, and I could create a good arch. But I kept, but it was important. I used to work out with a lot of powerlifters and Olympic lifters. And actually, one of my professors was the Olympic strength coach of the early 70s, Dr. Pat O'Shea. And he died several years ago, but he was a wonderful mentor. And he used to talk to us about form and technique and stuff. And I remember them always telling me, yeah, keep your ass down, because you constantly see people create an arch, but their ass is in the air. They're like, everything pops up. It's like, well, that's not really what you want, right?
Oh, you're right. I think that, and this is one of those things where you actually have to, you need good coaching. When you learn these lifts the correct way, and you want to maximize your potential and get the most weight out of a lift and prevent injury, you need good coaching. I mean, it's hard to, and whether that be online coaching, and evaluating videos and making phone calls and emailing, or you have somebody on site, going through the lift with you. I mean, they both can work. I mean, but you're right. The butt coming off the bench is a huge thing in powerlifting, because you can, or the lift doesn't count.
Right. They don't count.
The way I bench and all my guys bench, and the way I was taught by my coach, which now lives in Florida, we bench with our feet out. And what that does really is, benching with your feet under, you can create leg drive, and you can still create power coming through your hips. But if your feet are out the way we bench, in my personal opinion, you can create leg drive like you're in a squat position. You can really push through your heels, through the floor, and transfer that power through your legs, and your butt is skimming the bench, to so to say, but you're actually transferring that power from you're pushing through your heels. It's coming through your legs, through your hips, and actually back into your back.
Oh.
Which sounds kind of crazy when you explain it that way, but when you show somebody, it really makes sense and really comes into play. And that's why, to kind of piggyback that subject, that's why the huge thing in powerlifting, I'm sure you've heard in bodybuilding, is, your lats going to make a bigger bench. Well, of course, because that's where you hold the weight. You've seen guys come out and hold the weight in their shoulders, and they're just shaking.
Yeah.
Your shoulder's not made for that, So
right.
That's hold the weight in our back. So, but back to the setup, you got feet under, feet out, but foot placement, leg drive, and, the way your shoulders are positioned in you push your shoulders together and push them back into the bench and try to transfer that load into your shoulders and back, is where you would start for the proper setup.
What's the next step in next tip, I should say? What's next after that?
Well, after you set up, I think you need to have the bar brought out. The lift off needs to be brought out to the proper placement.
Okay.
You need to take it in position, and then the bar path, depending on if you're a raw bencher or an equipped bench, it's going to be slightly different. But the bar path is very important. And I guess the easiest way to explain that is, if you're repping weight, you can see how the bar will jump back and forth.
Yep.
Maybe your breastplate, maybe hit high on your chest, maybe hit on your stomach. And a lot of that comes in is, your stabilizer muscles need to be stronger, of course. But the bar path and bar placement is very important, because when you go to press, and, which your wrist and elbows need to be under the bar, if you're not positioned correctly, you're not going to be able to generate the power you want to coming out of the hole. So that bar path coming down from the start needs to be in the right place, because if it's off a little bit, then your press coming out of the hole, you're just not going to be able to generate it.
So is that bar path, is it a straight plane, or is it an arc? Because I've seen it done both ways.
In raw benching, it's going to be more of a straight path.
Okay.
You're going to come out, and the bars are going to come straight down.
It's going to go straight. Yeah.
Yeah, with the equip benching and with a shirt tightening down, the bars are going to come lower to your belly, which I'm sure you've seen videos. Mm-hmm. And that's because the shirt kind of creates a groove for you, some of the more aggressive shirts. Some shirts you can bench high in, but a lot of the shirts will kind of create a path for you. But in raw benching, your bar path's going to be more straight because you just can't hold that extreme heavy weight out there because, your shoulders can't do it.
Right.
You can hold it in your back, but when you go to press, how, if it's far out and too front of you and you push it straight up, you're going to get hung out there. So, and if you press it too high, we call it chicken winging or T-Rex, where if you press it too high and your elbows flare out too fast, you can't generate power from out there either. So it's very important, when you're benching the max weight, and you see it all the time when somebody touches the wrong place, they just don't have the strength. And you can ask them to go rest, gather your thoughts, bring them back to the bench, reset them up, and they do the exact same weight and they smoke the weight because the bar is perfect, I'm sure you've done it. We've all done it.
Absolutely. I'm more of I take more of a bodybuilding approach. So I'm always trying to feel whatever muscle I'm working the most intensely as possible. So I'm not so worried about my elbows flaring. As a matter of fact, I kind of want them to flare a little bit so I can put more isolation on my chest. But yeah, absolutely. It's definitely. So the next tip would be what's next after getting the correct bar plate, after getting correct proper setup, next correct bar placement and such. What's next after that?
Well, I think that when you set up and you're pushing your heels through the floor, your feet are tucked under you, and you got leg drive, and your arch is up, and your shoulders digged into the bench, you want to keep your body under constant tension during the entire lift. And one of the big things you'll see is really when you're under that much tension, and even a raw bencher, but when you're in equipment, it's early stage when guys and girls are beginning, they find it very hard to keep that tension through the entire lift because sometimes the lift is like 5 or 6 seconds total,
right?
Even more sometimes. So you want to flatten out in the bottom, or you're relaxing the bottom, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring the bar to your body instead of taking your body to the bar, which means you're pushing up, So you want to keep tension through the entire movement, which in turn will keep you from heaving in the hole. I don't know if you've heard that terminology, Tad.
I have not, no.
It's kind of, you're kind of rearing up for the press.
Okay, yeah. I know what it is. Okay.
Kind of want to flatten out and then kind of heave. You don't want to do that because it's going to throw your bar path off. There's a possibility for injury, and it doesn't count in the competition, raw or equipped. So, you just always want to keep good technique through the entire movement, even if it's a max lift. You want to keep that good technique.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of people, when they, at least in the gym, not any powerlifters I've seen, but in the gym, guys and gals who are trying to do one rep maxes or trying to do heavier weight, and you see them doing some of these things like heaving in the hole, or they're really, I can tell that what they're trying to do is get this bar from point A to point B. That's it.
Right.
And they're not really focused on one, feeling the muscle that they're trying to work, if they're trying to do that, but more importantly, they're not focused on really moving through the proper technique so that they can maximize the exercise and minimize the risk of injury, because eventually people like that just get hurt. Eventually.
Yeah, which rolls into the next one, which will be, we've all seen this in the gym, we've probably done ourselves or in our career, but the twisting. If you don't want to heave in the hole because it's going to throw your bar path off. And, the next tip would be keep from twisting, which when the weight gets heavy, you're trying to do whatever you can to get it up. You'll kind of see a swimming motion, or one side of your body will be stronger than the other, so that side is going to dominate. And when it does, it's going to create a twist. And when you get twisted, and you're going to get hung. You're going to get hung every time. So if you just stay the technique and don't let your body twist or your hips twist, because when your hips twist, now you're pushing off one leg less than the other one. So it just throws all the mechanics off. Right. Everything. It's
kind of funny you mention that, because I had a contractor in my home doing some work when I first moved here, and he was, of course, when he saw me, he's like, oh, he got inspired to kind of go into his garage and start lifting. He had a little Olympic set in his gym, in his garage. And so he's like, and he told me this story. He's like, hey, so I went in my garage this weekend and I decided to, bench. So he put on like 185 pounds or whatever. And remember, this guy is like, he's an ex-military veteran, and he's a nice guy. He's in early 50s and pretty decent shape. I mean, he's not like, he's not working out currently, but he's not overweight or anything. He looks pretty decent. He's does labor for his, work. He's a general contractor. So he thought he can go in there and just, have a little workout. So he goes in there and he's like, I put on 185 pounds. He goes, I dropped that bar down to my chest and I couldn't get it off. And I'm like, he said, and I said, well, were you by yourself? He's like, yeah, I was all by myself in my garage. I'm like, well, that's like rule number one. Don't be by yourself if you've never. He's like, so he said, like, I sat there for 30 minutes with this bar on my chest, yelling for my wife who wasn't home at the time. He's like, and I'm like, well, I'm glad you got it off. Yeah. He goes, eventually she came. Eventually he got it off, and he had to weasel it. But it was just kind of funny that he had to. But stuff like that can happen. I see it happen all the time in the gym. Where people they'll have to dump a weight. And they're just they're doing this twisting thing, and they just eventually just dump it because they can't get it off. And it's like, I tell people this all the time, and I would love to get your input on it, but that I'm usually speaking from a physique development standpoint, but that the weight that you use is just a tool. It's not the end and all means here. Now, for powerlifting, it can be the end and all means at a competition. But when it comes to training, your consistent training that you have, like, don't focus so much on the weight. Focus on the action and focus on the development and what you're trying to achieve with that weight. It's like fixing a car. You want to you put the right tools in place, and the car will do exactly what you want it to do eventually. So, and I kind of feel like that's the same way. If you have proper benching technique and your workouts support the kind of activity that you're going to do, this application of, then you should be able to, without forcing the issue, which is I think what people are doing when they really load it up and they're really trying to force. And I understand the philosophy because I was in my early 20s too. That it can definitely be. There's a lot of room for error, and there's a lot of, and you don't maximize the time you have to work out, and you don't get the kind of gains that you want, the kind of progress, because you're not really utilizing the exercise properly. Because you can't go into a meet and do some of these things that we're talking about. You have to do it correctly. So if you need to work it, like you said, you have to work out exactly the way you're going to do it in the at competition. And I tell my athletes this too. I say, look, when you pose, and we'll talk about posing, because posing is very similar to technique. You want to do it correctly, otherwise you're not going to display your physique. I said the way you practice at home is going to be the way that you do it on stage. So do it correctly. And I was told this. My uncle told me this years ago when I was playing golf. He said, "You've heard the term practice makes perfect, right, Tad?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, that's wrong." He said, "Practice doesn't make perfect." He goes, "But perfect practice makes perfect." So I said, "Oh, okay." So because if you're practicing the wrong way, Tad, he's like, then you're going to do it the wrong way, and that's not perfect, now is it? And I'm like, no, it isn't. You're right. So I took that to heart, and I think that this is one of those instances where, when people do this, whether it be bench pressing or whether it be deadlifting or whether it be squatting, perfect form makes perfect in competition, right?
Very well spoken. You bring up a good point, because I think that, anybody walking into a gym or getting in bodybuilding, getting in powerlifting, with just getting into it and just having your way with it and going at it, I think anybody can get to a certain point. And I think as long as you've been in business, you've seen guys get to a certain point and they need a lot of work. And then you've seen other guys get to a point you're like, wow, you got pretty far with nothing to your disposal.
Right.
So I'm taking on different clients in different stages, and you've had to tweak one. You've had to almost rebuild one.
Right.
So, anybody can get to a certain point in any sport, and you're going to get to the point to where you're not going to get any better without proper coaching or better coaching and better technique. Because, it just can't happen, because there's a reason why there are elite lifters, pro bodybuilders, pro athletes in the world, and everybody is not.
Right.
Because those guys do, they go the extra mile. They have the best coach, and they have the best trainers, they have the best equipment, and on and so forth. So, yeah, perfect practice makes perfect is very, very much the way it is.
Yeah, and I think,
And
yeah, and I think that,
and,
what was that?
and what you're saying is you have to you have to take that mentality. I mean, you have to, because if you don't, two things happen. And this is a huge thing in powerlifting that we preach. Don't get used to failing.
Right.
Realize that you can't make every lift. You're gonna miss weights, but don't get used to it, because when you go to a meet and get used to it, it doesn't bother you. You have to have something driving you from attempt 1 to attempt 2 if you missed attempt 1. If you just we go to the back and you just lackadaisical, and you're like, oh no, I'll get it. And you go out and miss it again, you're like, no, I'm fine, I'll get the next one, and you miss the next one. I mean, there's something wrong there.
Right.
You have to be like, what did I do wrong? We need to evaluate this, that, and the other. So, I mean, we don't get used to missing. We don't get used to failing.
Yeah.
But on the hand, I mean, you have to take chances, and you have to put weight on the bar, and you have to hold it, and hopefully technique will take you through the lift.
Well, and I think that's that leads. I think I know you have 7 tips, and because I've read through them, and and that kind of leads us to the last one, which you term as your mentality, which is your emotional attitude, and it sounds like this all sort of works off the same thing. For proper benching technique, is you really have to approach this lift with the right attitude and the right mentality, like being able to accept a failure, so to speak, because it's not a failure of the sport. It's not a failure of you necessarily. It's just one lift. It's like you can lose all the battles as long as you win the war. It's okay.
It's not what you start with; it's what you end with.
That's right. Exactly. Let's diverge for just a couple of minutes before we end our interview here, and talk a little bit about. I know you have been using the oxygen factor.
Yes.
And you're an oxygen factor athlete, and I use the oxygen factor, so I bring it up because I love this stuff. It's helped me immensely in my training when I prep, and also in the off season. So tell me how you use it and what kind of impact it has had on your training and on your lifts.
I mean, it's definitely taken to another level. We have an aspect in our gym, and some guys may not. We train in a personal training facility, and we have roll-up doors. So let's say, for example, in the summertime, it's hot, and so the oxygen came in huge, because I mean, you're sweating profusely, you're winded. I mean, this stuff just brings you right back, and it's something that you're not going to take a hit and feel an immediate rush. No, it's not that way. It's going to be later on your set, on into your workout, and you'll be able to do a couple extra reps, a couple extra sets and stuff like that. But, it just brings an element. We just recently did an interview, and it brings an element to your training that if you don't have it and then you acquire it, I mean, you tell the difference. There's just no way not to tell the difference if you use it properly.
How do you use it? How do you use it when you train, and do you use that at meets?
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. One of the huge things, and we harped on this in an interview, is preloading. I don't think people preload with oxygen the way they should, and because it's got to be running through your system. I mean, you can't just decide to hit it before you get on the platform and expect it to work. It can happen. So with this in Knoxville, my 2 guys, and I say them because they just recently lifted. I mean, we looked at the flights, and we had to figure out when they need to start preloading, and how much they need to use through the meet, and how many lifts they had and stuff like that. We planned it out. I mean, it worked perfectly. I mean, they were never winded, and my guy that did a full meet, which was squat, then benched and deadlifted, he was strong as he was at the beginning of the meet. It was incredible. He pulled 80 pounds off the floor like it was just the bar. I mean, he probably could have pulled 725 to 750. And he created the oxygen factor. I mean, it's an incredible tool in our business.
How do you preload with it? Because the way I do it is before, like for instance, in a workout, I'll go before I work out, I'll do like 15 or 20 puffs of it, and then I'll use 3 or 4 in between all my sets for the first 1 or 2 exercises. So I super saturate my blood, and I feel a difference when I don't use it. Cause I recently ran out, and I just didn't reload my gym bag with it. And I did legs the other day. And I'm like, holy crap! I'm like, this sucks. I'm like, I need my oxygen. It's like, but how do you do it?
We do about the same way. We start preloading as we're warming up, and then we do about 5 to 10 hits. We found it almost between 5 and 10 is good for us because we do the max lifts.
Right.
So I think we have to generate so much power, and it just takes so much out of you some days. The powerlifting movements do. So we really, we go between 5 to 10 hits for each lift. And if I'm really tired one day, I'll take a little more. Because it's definitely not gonna hurt. But that's pretty much how we do. And I definitely, if anything, I do it for my major lifts. I do it a lot through my entire workout, but I for sure do it for my major lifts and my big movements, especially on back day and leg day. So, but yeah.
Well, what now? Other than the oxygen, what other kind of supplements would you recommend people to use, or do you use throughout your training, for meets, and also any other time?
We actually, we use ATP Extreme too.
Oh, excellent! I love this stuff.
And I'm telling you what, you put those two together, and it's incredible.
Yeah,
there's no, you can't feel a difference.
Yeah, that's the dynamic duo for me, man. Like, I don't work out without my ATP Extreme. I just don't. And I happen to work with the company as well, but it was really only because Craig, who started the company, he said, "Hey, you should try this. I don't know how applicable this is for bodybuilding, but you tell me, and so I tried it. And workout one, I was like, I'm sold. I'm like, this stuff is the bomb. I'm like, I love it. I'm like,
well,
so I definitely know that it has made an impact. So I'm glad to hear that it does for you too. What else? What other kinds of supplements do you use for your training? Like the creatine? Do you do all the creatine and all of it?
Tad, I'm a huge guy on eating.
Yeah, there you go.
It may sound crazy, but I want to get most of my stuff from food. I do take protein shakes, and sometimes occasionally I'll take pre-workouts and, but there again, with the ATP Extreme and Oxygen Factor, you really don't need a pre-workout, but sometimes I'll take it. But, I take protein shakes and, I take creatine every now and then. I kind of change out a lot of stuff so my body didn't get used to anything. But I just try to get most of my stuff from food. I just don't do a huge amount of supplements. I don't have this pill box.
Yeah,
530 I take every day. Of course, I take my aminos and glutamine and stuff like that, which is the building blocks of powerlifting, bodybuilding. But I'm just not a huge guy on thousands of supplements. And that's why I was glad to get the Oxygen Factor and APT Extreme, because it was an instant impact. To my training, and it's a small additive if you really think about it.
Yeah.
And it's a big difference. So it wasn't a problem at all for me to add that in and keep it in.
Well, is there anybody that you'd like to recognize or thank or give a shout out to before we end our interview?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to thank Craig Inaba. He's a great guy.
Yeah, Craig's good.
He took me on. He took our team on, the entire team on. He's given me the ATP Extreme. We're sponsored by Oxygen Factor, which played a huge role in those guys' meets this past weekend. So I can't thank those guys enough. And I appreciate you having me on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's very nice to meet you, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. You're I especially like hearing it from a different perspective, from especially a different training perspective, because I'm so brainwashed in the bodybuilding genre. I've worked with powerlifters before, but for the most part, most of my expertise is in the physique development world. Figure, bikini, bodybuilding, fitness, all those kinds of things. So, but powerlifting is something that strength, all the strength events and all those things I'm fascinated by, because I know when we kind of mentioned this before, I know that you need to put all the hard work in. There's no doubt about it. That it's a lifestyle. You got to put all the hard work in. But at the elite level, like, not everyone is going to bench 900 pounds. Like, I don't care how. And you mentioned it before, not in the same words, but for the most part, at that level, when you're squatting, over 1,000 pounds for like world records and things, and you're benching in these really high numbers and deadlifting these high numbers, you have to be structurally, mechanically set up to do this. And not everybody is. I am not. I'm 5'7". I'm Japanese by nature, my heritage. I'm a small boned. My everything is going to break on me. Okay. So I've had to be, in my career as a bodybuilder, I've had to be very, very, very attentive to form and technique and my training and injury prevention, because I know when I start to do, as I mentioned to you before, when I start to train heavier, like on the bench press, I was feeling things in my shoulders that I never felt before, and I did not like that in my 20s. And the same thing for these other things. So I love hearing this different perspective, and I have a deep admiration for guys like you who can go in there and who can just brutalize their bodies like this and go to these meets and put up these insane numbers, because I could never do that.
It's not as easy as it looks. I mean, there's a lot of Epsom salt baths, and there's a lot of ice packs during the week to get me through the next week. So,
well, you may want to try that that cryotherapy. It'll be interesting.
Definitely.
I hear good things about it.
Yeah. I did want to mention that a lot of the stuff we went over today, I mean, here on RFC, we're actually going to come out with a series of bench videos. And we're going to put those together, and I'm going to write an article to go more in depth what we talked about today, because we kind of skimmed over a few things, but we definitely got some stuff coming, so to elaborate a lot more on what we discussed today. So that'll be a good thing too.
Oh, excellent! I love the Raw Fitness Combine concept that we're doing here, and so I'm so glad that you're on board to help doing some of these things. You're going to add a tremendous amount of value. I know it. So, well, thank you very much for the time, Jason. I really appreciate it. And I see the fan going on your ceiling, so it must be better weather than I have here in Pittsburgh and Nashville there. So you have again, thank you very much, and you have a wonderful rest of the week. And is there anybody else you want to thank before we go?
I'd like to thank all the guys that have helped me get to this point. I've had a lot of coaches. I mean, to name a few, Brent Tracy, Paul Key, J.B. Hill. I've had a lot of guys that have taught me a lot of things that I use today, and I'm passing on to my guys and people that, that I train ask me questions. So here again, I would just like to take a minute to thank those guys that have helped me actually get to the point to where I am today, because I've learned a lot, and I've avoided a lot of pitfalls that some guys have gone through because of the people that I've known and coaches I've known and guys throughout the powerlifting world. So I just would like to give those guys a huge thank you.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'm glad you said that, because I'm a big advocate. If you've ever seen my stuff that I put out there in the social media space, I'm a big advocate of the attitude of gratitude, that none of us are an island, that we get to the places that we get to, especially success, because of the support that we have from the people around us. And I am not defunct in that either. I owe my success to a tremendous amount of people. And so everyone that knows me knows that I give my thanks very, 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 very openly and often, because I have a career and a lifestyle and a wonderful life because of it. And not just in my career, but also my life in general, that I've learned so much from the people that I've interacted with, my mentors, the coaches that I've had over the years as well. So I'm so glad to hear that you have such a nice, humble attitude about this, because I think that is the trademark of a true champion, is humility and gratitude. So
thank you, Chad.
Oh, you are so welcome. It's been a real pleasure, Jason, and I know we'll be talking again. So like I said, you have a wonderful week, and it's been great to have you on the show. This is Tad the Diet Coach with Jason Lawson. I'm going to call you Mr. Bench, so to speak. And good luck on your next meet, and I hope you hit that 900.
Thank you, Tad. I'll definitely keep you updated.
All right, excellent. Thanks again. This is Tad the Diet Coach for Raw Fitness Combine saying good luck and be positive. All right, bud. Hey, let me just turn this on.